Really?
I hate film schools. I think the underdog is the most powerful person because they don't have really the need to belong to the status quo. They can make their own status quo.
Please put your hands together for Luca Guadagnino. Exciting, no?
Beautiful.
Is that all?
In this case, it was tweeted recently by a cisgender white gay man named Tyler, who's like a conservative influencer on Twitter. He wrote the caption, "Know the difference. We are not the same." And it's a picture where it's split into two sections. On the left, it says LGB, and on the right, it says TQIA+. And over the LGB part, there is a photo of the recently out gay football player, Carl Nassib. He's like hot, hunky, white, all-American looking dude. And then over the TQIA+, it is a picture of Jeffrey Marsh, who is a queer TikTok influencer who makes these like tender TikToks that appeal to people who have second parents, and they are visibly androgynous, wearing a dress, and eye makeup, and have facial hair. The way that you're supposed to read this image, right, is like LGBT people are, normal, and we're football players, and we can pass in society, and we don't, push anyone's buttons. And then the TQIA+ people are freaks, and we're flamboyant, and we're cross-dressing, and we're in your face. And there's an obvious connotation here with how you're meant to feel about each of these people. And so I want to get your reaction to this image.
It reminds me of things that I used to hear as a millennial who was coming up during the gay marriage fights of the early 2000s. The things people would say about I don't care if you're gay as long as you don't shove it in my face. That kind of messaging that is so tired, and you'll still sometimes hear. This idea that some people, just how they live and how they present is shoving it in your face in some way. Because when people say things like that, they see being queer as so other that it feels in their face. For somebody to just live, it's just so tired, because the reason that we even have people who are the more respectable, straight-laced, seeming out queer people today is because of the people who are willing to be the bold ones to kind of be in people's faces, the Jeffrey Marshes of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I skulk around conservative LGBT internet way more than I should, because it's a form of self-harm for me at a certain point. Something that happens a lot there is this revisionist history where people will say the goal of the gay rights movement was to assimilate into society. And I'm like, which gay rights movement are we talking about? Not the one that I'm familiar with.
It's totally ahistorical. So before Pride parades, before Stonewall, there were these events every year put together mostly by white cis gay men called the Annual Reminder And they started in the 50s and 60s, and they were, again, very cis male, very white. They would wear suits, they were very subdued, and they would just like march calmly in the streets saying, this is what gay people look like, see, we're normal like you, accept us. And it didn't do anything. It didn't score any political victories. It wasn't until Stonewall and fighting against the cops and this really diverse coalition of sex workers and trans people and queer people and homeless people all fighting the police that we actually started to see any kind of social gains. So when people regurgitate that same logic now, so many decades later, it's just really sad.
How would you describe respectability politics?
I would say that respectability politics is the idea that if, as a member of a marginalized group, if you would only act correctly, you would somehow win the approval of the majority and no longer be oppressed. That it's on you as the individual to just somehow be the perfect type of queer person of color, whatever it is, to earn your right into assimilation.
The definition, according to Wikipedia, is the assimilation of LGBT or otherwise marginalized people based on sexuality or transgender status into a hegemonic and heteronormative society. This can be achieved by downplaying stereotypes or behaviors associated with homosexuality, for example, cross-dressing or flamboyant dressing, public displays of same-sex affection, or participating in cisgender heterosexual institutions. And there is a version of respectability politics, I feel like, in every marginalized group, and I feel like every marginalized community has their own like infighting about this, right?
Yeah, I think everybody internalizes that stigma, right, of what everyone from the outside says about your group, and you really don't want to live up to that stereotype, even though actually most of the time those stereotypes, there's nothing wrong with them, right? Like, what's the problem with being flaming? What's the problem with not wanting to get married, and like having a million partners or whatever it is? We internalize that self-loathing, and then we hate anybody in our own group that reminds us of what we're the most embarrassed about ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like respectability politics, it's usually expressed, in my experience, on like through our judgment of people in our group, right? And so in this case, LGBT people who we don't want to be associated with. And so I feel like in queer communities, it's like this judgment that's levied against like very flaming and flamboyant gay men, or queer people who are in kink communities, fat queer people, sex workers, drag queens, non-binary people, people who use neopronouns, oftentimes autistic queer people. The list goes on.
There's almost a sense of like, if you're too frivolous, you don't deserve rights. That like queer rights are this very serious thing, and you're trying to get these legal protections and get plugged into the legal existing, cisgender heterosexual system. But if you need a surgery that's like too weird of a surgery that we can't understand, or the way you present is unprofessional, you don't really need to do that. Really, do you? Like, can't you quiet it down while we're in public? You're making us look bad.
You're making us look bad. That is kind of, okay, hold on, I'm jumping the gun. So from your essay, a quote that I took from your essay was, I don't think any of us literally believe that the more irritating a person is, the more of a pressing political threat they are. But we behave as if they do. We devote huge amounts of time to complaining about the types of queer people that irritate us, and develop complex taxonomies for describing why they are so annoying and why defeating that annoyingness matters. I feel like that's the whole thing, what you just said, right? They're making us look bad. The cringy queer TikToker is giving queers a bad look. Drag queens being too in public, or people at kink festivals, or the Senate twink, who we will get to. Like, they're making us look bad. That, as a thought process, is what we're going to attempt to unpack today, right? They're making us look bad. Who are they? And are they making us look bad? So we're going to look at a bunch of examples of that today and try to get to the bottom of this. Like, do we have to cast out weird queers? If we do, I'm first to go. So
Most of us are pretty weird.
And that's the thing too. It's like when you start scraping back, like, okay, who doesn't belong to any of the groups that are considered weird? It's like literally just Pete Buttigieg.
And even he is like, you know how he edits his own Wikipedia to list all of his watches that he collects and stuff?
What?
This is a whole thing. Somebody did this whole investigation, and they proved that he was editing his own Wikipedia from his professional office, and it updated all. He has this watch fetish or whatever, or special interest. So even he's a freak, we're all weird and pathetic and cringy in some way or the other.
Some of us attend kink festivals, and some of us update our own Wikipedia pages to reflect our updated watch collections. And you know what? Good for Pete. I like Pete more now.
Yeah, that's his one redeeming personality.
Okay, so that's so funny. Because we're on a podcast that some people might be consuming through YouTube, I want to start with some YouTube-based examples, and I actually think especially towards younger people who are sort of maybe coming into their queerness or just coming into politics in general. The first place where they learn to adopt this mindset of we need to cast out the weirdest among us so that us normal gays, or whatever that means, so that we look good for the rest of the world. There are people who devote their entire careers in media to making content that feeds that explicit impulse. One of them is Blair White, who is someone who I think about a lot. I don't know, actually all of the people on this list that I have, Blair White, Ariel Scarcella, Buck Angel, I wish I didn't think about them as much as I do, but I'm so fascinated by their ability to churn out the same video every single week for years on end. So what do you know about these people?
I remember when Ariel Scarcella first became explicitly transphobic, and people fighting against her, and she kind of pulled a J.K. Rowling a little bit, where it was well, now that you've criticized me, I'm going to be even more transmisogynistic.
Yeah.
See, won't that show you? And then, of course, Blair White has been the subject of so much complaints and speculation about, do you even believe this stuff that you're saying all of the time? And just that weird, just soulless career path of, I'm going to make videos about cringy trans people about being a trans person, and just how soul-rotting that has to be. And then Buck Angel obviously has been the subject of many a controversy over the years, since the basically early 2000s, when he outed one of the Wachowskis against their will, and has been basically dunking on other trans people to lift himself up, I guess, ever since.
Yeah, so these are all people who have ended up in the YouTube sphere. If you're listening, you might already know who they are. Blair White, I just collected a collection of titles from her rich body of work online. Here are a few titles of recent YouTube videos. Okay, wait, also, yes, this is important to note. Blair White is a trans woman. She's very pretty. She's very feminine. So, okay, here's some titles. Mr. Beast's trans friend is a nightmare. The trans lesbians of Tinder are a big problem. Reacting to insane trans TikToks with Buck Angel. How TikTok is convincing teens they're trans and mentally ill. Okay. The truth about Dylan Mulvaney. Dylan Mulvaney, I'm so sorry, sister. The disturbing LGBTQ kids show needs to be stopped. It's the same video over and over and over again. And Ariel Scarcella too. She is a lesbian. She, for a long time, for years on YouTube, got her start making just lesbian content. And then at some point started wading into the waters of transphobia of oh no, these trans people are doing a little too much and they're making us look bad as a queer community. And then she gets pushback for that, and instead of reflecting, she just jumps into the deep end, and now literally every video she makes is trans craziness on woke TikTok, blah, 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 blah. And they all get so many views, and it's just so, I don't know, if all I was interested in was making a lot of Google AdSense revenue, I think that's a really dependable way to do it.
People seem to just keep falling for it, and then it also gets the rage bait of us watching it because we hate it and because it hurts. It's picking a scab.
What's interesting to me is less these people, because like I said, we could debate until the sun comes up about whether or not they actually believe what they're saying, or they're just doing it for the endless amount of clicks that they know they will always get. But what's interesting to me is like I think the fact that people tune into this type of content and like all of the there are thousands of comments on all of these videos being like, yeah, I can't believe that person really thinks they're trans when they're just a non-binary freak and da-da-da. And it's all of these people who are like inside the queer community who so consciously want to push themselves away from other people in the queer community by like becoming the bully.
Kind of to one of your points, like a lot of kids watch this content, a lot of queer kids or people who are just questioning their identity or coming into themselves, newly out people. And it's almost like this stage, I think for a lot of us, of identity development where you're trying to figure out what kind of person can I be? You know, what am I allowed to be and what am I not allowed to be? And so a lot of really impressionable people or people who are in like a really vulnerable spot, they see this stuff and then they say, oh, I can't be like these blue-haired pronoun users. Like that's become such a thing that people literally do actually make decisions about what they do with their hair and their body based on not wanting to seem like the wrong kind of queer person. And then of course conservatives lap it up too. And it's like when we have these conversations, we're doing the work of conservatives for them by saying more and more people are realizing they're trans online. Like the implication of that video is being trans is supposed to be weird and rare and there shouldn't be a lot of us. You know, that's like the unspoken premise of a lot of this stuff. Like these messages discourage more people from being queer.
And it's like, why? We see this so much from inside of the queer community, right? Like this judgment calls made about who is really queer and who is not really queer. So many of these like Blair White, Buck Angel type videos, which we're gonna get to him in a second, but don't go anywhere. I saw that tweet you wrote about me last week and it pissed me off, so you're included in the outline. Buck Angel does not like me, and that, my friends, is fine. There's so many of these videos, like, as a real trans person, I can say who all of these, like, fake trans people are who are not really part of the community, but cis queer people do this too, especially, I feel like, with bisexuals. There's, like, this delineation around, like, who is really bisexual and who hasn't, and, like, for as much progressive conversation as we have about no one owes anyone their dating or sexual history, we do this thing a lot where I feel like, especially towards bisexual women, where we're like, tell me which women you've slept with, or else, as far as I'm concerned, you're a straight woman.
I wonder if a lot of this stuff comes from like queer trauma and this idea of, you know, reproducing the abuse you went through. Of like, it was so hard for me, I had to fight so hard to transition, and I had to fight so hard and deal with overt homophobia every day. And so how dare you come waltzing in and you don't even want to get surgery, or you were in relationships where you were basically closeted, people didn't realize you were queer all your life. It must have been so easy for you, and now I'm gonna like beat up on you. Even though that's not actually the case, right? Where being closeted or not being seen for who you are, or not having the freedom to explore who you are, that itself is a very traumatic thing that I think all queer people undergo. We're all made to suppress ourselves. So it's so counterproductive, and I think it really does just come from that place of resentment. I suffered, so you have to suffer too. I had to work so hard to make myself pass, so why don't you even want to pass? That completely devalues the thing that's the most important thing to me, like if you go right, like it's a, you know, shit lashes out at it, or you were in a straight marriage for many years, and of course you were like quietly really unhappy and lonely and detached from the queer community. Like it's not easy to be a closeted bisexual person, actually. It's not easy to be straight passing. But on the outside, we say, how dare you? You've got to walk down the street without being hate crimed, or things like that.
Something that I think about a lot is like how we identify with our queerness, and especially for queer people, how we define our queerness by this pain involved in our like coming out experiences and stuff. And I see that a lot. I mean, there's a lot of asexual discourse on Twitter going like, well, what oppression do you deal with for being asexual? Which, like, first of all, I don't even really understand, because do we not know about like corrective rape? Like, that's a thing.
It's really infuriating to me, especially the asexual stuff, because so often, and the way bisexual women get treated, because the rest of us in the queer community will talk about how those groups aren't oppressed, and will never actually listen to the members of those groups when they try to speak up and say, I experience, like you said, corrective rape. I live in a world that's built all around marriage, and so if I don't connect to people romantically and I don't want to get married, I'm aromantic or whatever, I'm structurally excluded from a lot of economic benefits. Like, we just don't listen to them because we've already decided as a community, oh, they're annoying and they're just complaining about the smallest things, but they have it so easy. And I think it kind of still does come from, like, there's a tiny Blair White potentially in all of us that
The Blair White within.
yes, yeah, you have to question the Blair White within, that you know, and ask yourself, like, am I moralizing suffering? Like, do I think that my suffering makes me a better person? Because suffering doesn't make you a better person. It's just a horrible thing that happens to you, and it can rot inside of you and make you lash out at other people, or it can be something you choose to learn from, and a reason to empathize with people who struggle differently from your own. And again, I just keep coming back to that idea of, like, being erased and invisible and not even having the chance to figure out who you are because nobody around you's even heard of a demisexual before. That doesn't sound anything like privilege to me. Like, that sounds like the height of being disenfranchised. To not even know your own people or know that you can be who you are, that is like one of the most foundational queer traumas. And that happens to us whether we're trans or we're star gender or omnisexual or whatever else. Like, who's hurt by people finding a
What
gender
gender?
that feels like home to them?
Who indeed? There is
What
so
gender?
much back and forth around like neo-pronouns and neo-labels. What do you make of that, right? There are so many people being like, okay, well, I'm fine with like he, him, she, her, maybe they, them. But the second you start doing this like zir, them stuff or go by demisexual or, you know, any star gender or like all of these words, which I gotta be honest, I haven't heard of half of these. Sometimes, especially when like very young queer people on TikTok are describing their gender and pronouns, like I've never heard of them either. But I try to fight back on the impulse to be like, well, oh my God, they're pushing this whole thing too far and they're gonna rock the boat and I'm gonna lose my rights as a result of this. Like, guys, come on.
When people say things like that, it's like they think those queer people are asking too much. And it's like they think acceptance is this like finite high, and it's like you can get being he, him, or she, her, but if you ask to be z, zim, zerd, oh, that's gonna ruin it all for all of us because it's asking cishet people to do too much work. And the project of queerness, I think, is for us to just kind of like flip everything over on its head, you know, like we want people to rethink how they think about gender and sexuality and gender roles in relationships. And so it seems like to me, the more and more people we have that are just doing things their own freaky queer way that we've never heard of before, that like helps really change the paradigm. That helps set all of us free. It's not a threat to us. If anything, the queer people that are more willing to be out there and do something that we've never heard of before, that is totally baffling, that makes us all question the like cis-het conditioning that so much of us still have, even if we're in the queer community. There's a little bit of this discourse that happens in trans circles all the time, like passing versus like fuck passing, where a lot of trans people, especially trans women and men, they do want to seamlessly pass, if not as cis, but then as the gender that they identify as, because they want the safety of that, they want people to know how to treat them, and that's just true enough for them that that's the easiest way to move through the world. But there's also a lot of queer people who there is no such thing as passing as what they are, because society has like no conception of it yet. Like, for the most part, there is no passing as non-binary still for most people. Like, if you use they, them, or if you use z's and zer, you're pretty much going to have to correct people. You're going to have to assert yourself, or just tolerate people being wrong. And so you might seem like a more annoying queer person because you have to assert yourself, because there is no structure in place for you. We put like this weird onus on queer people, again, to like kind of ask, like, do I really need this? What do I need to make people understand about me? And I don't think we get to ever decide for someone else what they need and what's like a life and death, or even just like an important validating issue for them. And yeah, we get into a lot of trouble as a community when we act like, okay, being able to use a bathroom that aligns with your gender, that's important because it's so you won't die. But wearing an outfit that you feel comfortable in, if it's a little obnoxious, you don't really need that. You don't need that badly enough. That's not acceptable, or whatever the case may be.
I want to revisit Buck Angel really briefly. Buck Angel is he's a trans man. He is a former porn star. And my understanding is that his porn has been very influential.
I mean, I think it's introduced people to trans people. I remember in his porn, he used to call himself the man with the pussy, which, like, even that is kind of treating even himself as, like, a novelty. Like, he's the only guy with a pussy. That was how a lot of people got introduced to him.
Yeah, it worked for him. He got very famous in the porn industry. And now he's just like, I don't know, which is such a cool story, right? Like, you were a trans guy porn star in the early 2000s, and now he's just like a Blair White. Like, he's just doing conservative social media. Like, we have to stop the crazy woke TikTok teens from, like, making our community look too bad. Like, dude, whatever. All right, in preparing for this episode, I was going through all of these people's YouTube channels, and again, with him as well as the rest of them, it's the same video over and over again. Reacting to cringy queers on TikTok. Like, oh my god, you're like 40 fucking years old. You should not be reacting to cringy TikTok teens. You should be going to the theater. Anyway.
Yeah. Join the symphony. Get some culture. Love yourself.
One of his recent YouTube videos is called Delusional Trans TikTok, featuring fake trans people. Okay, Buck. But so I want to play just the first clip for you, and we will talk about it together. The first part of it is like the first TikTok that he opens the video with, and then his immediate reaction to it.
Being told that I can't identify as trans and also non-binary, being told that non-binary doesn't exist, being told that non-binary people are just ruining everything for trans people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to do some reactions on some weirdo TikToks. People have lost their minds. It's so crazy. I mean, if we don't see mental illness, come on, man. We gotta really just get it together. These kids need help. But I'm gonna laugh at them anyway. I don't care. Because if you're stupid enough to put this on the internet, sorry, but you open the door for all of us to start making fun of you. Maybe if we make fun of you, you'll start to realize that whatever you think you're doing, it's actually damaging to you as well as to this community.
Somebody needs to remind him that being trans was considered a mental illness until a couple of years ago. That being gay was considered a mental illness. So if you're trying to say you're crazy for being a part of these groups, that's what's going to be said about all of us.
And has been said about all of us. All of our identities have been pathologized as mental illness at some point in the very recent history.
And also like, oh, you need help, so I'm going to just bully you. I'm going to just bully teens online. That's going to help them. That's going to protect the community.
Yeah.
How does scrutinizing that protect anyone?
Yeah, no, the only thing you're helping is once again, your Google AdSense account.
It just strikes me how, like, people like this, they've cut off everyone in their own community so much that all they have left after they do that is to pander to the conservatives. Like, that's the ultimate sadness of it. Like, I think we can resent them for running this grift and making a living out of exposing, like, young teens. Like, that's absolutely vile. But it's also just so pathetically sad that, like, there are very few places that the Ariel Marcellus can go anymore, like, among other queer people. Like, it's such a lonely existence, and they're just licking the boot of the cishet people now for the rest of their lives. Like, that's all they can do because they're so isolated.
Yeah, and then whenever you say something to that effect, they'll always turn it around and be like, well, whatever happened to the tolerant left queer community? And they use it as further reason to like, well, I don't associate with your community anymore because I expressed some questions, and now they don't want anything to do with me. And it's like, yeah, your questions were like fucking bullying 14-year-old non-binary kids on TikTok. Like, correct, I don't want anything to do with you. The only people who are ever saying, whatever happened to the tolerant left, are like people who just are expressing the most vile viewpoints that I don't feel the need to tolerate. And also, just side note on like tolerance, my goal personally, and I won't speak for other queer people, I won't speak for people on the left, my goal is not uninhibited tolerance. And I don't know how you feel about this, but like my goal is liberation for my people.
Yeah, there's a big difference between tolerance and actual political gains where we actually have power. And I think that is where it breaks down, that a lot of these respectability politics, queer people, they want to just lobby for the straights to approve of us and tolerate us. They don't actually want us to have enough power to be a threat to the cishet system. And I think that's what a lot of us are actually going for, is for us to actually have the ability to change society in really dramatic ways and like reclaim our power. And yeah, that is more scary. So we actually don't need all the cishets to like us. it might actually be to our credit if sometimes they feel a little uncomfortable, a little scared, a little annoyed. Like, that actually might be where our power lies.
So I think the examples we've looked at so far have been pretty straightforwardly just kind of bullying. And I think we're doing some good psychoanalysis of why that bullying can appeal to us, both as like the content creators of that, Blair White, R.S. Garcella, Black Angel, but also why it's interesting and sometimes feels good to view it. I want to go now into a little bit more of a complicated territory, and also one that I just have been wanting to talk about on this podcast forever. We've arrived, the Senate twink. Devin, what do you know about the Senate twink?
I know that he got caught or like exposed for having sex in like Senate chambers. I think he's an intern for a senator, and I guess people were scandalized by that, but I never understood what the big deal was. Like, I thought it was cool.
I think more people should be having sex in federal buildings. In December, a few months ago, a video of this congressional staffer who's like a white gay twink in his 20s, soon to be known as the Senate twink. A video of him having sex with another man in the U.S. Senate hearing room leaked online by the Daily Caller, which is a very far-right publication online. And it's just interesting that the fact that this boy's sex tape was leaked to the Daily Caller, like, I don't know, I always felt like that should have been more of a story. Like, it seemed vengeful, and there was some discussion about the fact that this was actually punishment for this congressional staffer's having held pro-Palestinian views, which is why the sex tape was leaked. I don't know the merit to all of that, and it also kind of strays from the point, but I do think how this video came to be was never enough of a conversation. But anyway, the people's reaction to this congressional staffer having gay sex in the U.S. Senate hearing room was explosive. It was like all anyone talked about for a week, and it really kind of dimmed the light of George Santos, which I do think, I think George Santos is pretty pissed about not being the most chaotic person in federal office for a little bit there.
He needs the attention at all times.
Yeah. What do you remember about how people reacted?
I remember seeing some of the criticism happening on Twitter about it just being really unprofessional, or sometimes people wrap their homophobia now in language of consent in these weird ways, where people are saying, oh, it's so inappropriate and dangerous to have sex in a public space. That gets lobbed at especially gay men a lot these days. So I saw a little bit of that kind of hand wringing, where people are pretending to care about propriety and consent and protecting other people. But it's somebody having sex in an office after hours isn't actually hurting anyone. So let's be real. This is about them being gay and about queer sexuality making you uncomfortable.
I mean, we're getting into it. I already know people are in the comments being like, why do you have to defend fucking in the government building, whatever. Okay, be patient with us. Let's take our time here a little bit. So this twink was immediately canonized by some as, a gay icon, right? Some people immediately were like, oh my god, this is so cunty. He was derided by most, I would say, within the community. This was very much an intra-community conversation. I don't think that many straight people were talking about the Senate twink, but it felt like every gay person was. And the main
God, it's crazy.
thing I saw over and over again was, this will set the community back. This makes us look bad. This Kansas Justice Horn on Twitter wrote, in a perfect world, one's actions would only be their own and not reflective of the entire LGBTQ community. But we don't live in that perfect world. This will likely give our oppressors another tool to target us, especially LGBTQ folks in public service or those wanting to serve. What do you make of that?
It is just the worst flavor of respectability politics. There's something that I talk about in my most recent book, Alone in Shame, about something called systemic shame, which is this idea that we blame marginalized individuals for the problem of their own oppression, and we task them with solving their own oppression. So every single thing you do as a queer person becomes a political symbol or a political statement. Like, you're never allowed to just be a human and just live and be flawed and messy and do dramatic things. And so I think it's kind of doing that, right? Like, it's putting the Senate twink or like any other gay person on this platform where, you know, we've been accused of being hypersexual perverts and dangerous for so long that if any single one of us is openly sexual, they get lobbed with all the blame when, you know, they're going to call us hypersexual perverts for drag story time. You know, that's already happening. Like, you can do the most tame, family-friendly stuff and you'll still get accused of being a pervert and dangerous and grooming children and all of this stuff. So it's just not reality to say that the Senate twink is what's setting us back. Like, we're already set back by a rising conservative movement. It's going to latch onto anything about us. So we have to own that stuff so that they can't use it against us.
We need to be having more sex in the Senate chamber, is what we're saying.
I do, because I kind of think that because the Senate doesn't have any respect for our bodies and what we do with our bodies as queer people. They're trying to legislate away our rights to transition, to have birth control, to have queer sex, to have queer relationships. So if they don't show any respect for our bodies and our sexuality, why would we show any respect to them? Like, I think kind of defiling it with our sexuality and messiness is what they deserve. And I think it's like a very, I mean, maybe saying somebody like fucking after hours isn't always a revolutionary act in their office, but I'm gonna give it to him. Like, you know, if he wants to say it's a political statement, I think it's like actually it is, but in like a like very transgressive revolutionary way.
I think when you zoom out a little bit and you look at the bigger picture here, it's like two men were having consensual sex in the room where millions of people are regularly stripped of human rights. I'm not so offended by this. I'm just not. But there was so much of that hand-wringing, right? Like, what a justice for, right? This will likely give our oppressors another tool to target us. There are like over 400 anti-trans bills going through state and federal governments last year. They are cracking down on trans people's right to play sports, use bathrooms. I know people are eyeing marriage equality from the right. Discrimination against us socially has become so normalized in the last 2 years. It's like, what tool are we handing them? I don't think any conservatives are waiting for us to hand them a tool. I don't think anyone saw this happen and was like, yes, now my oppression of the gays is justified. Finally, I can begin to discriminate against him. Were Republicans on the precipice of being nicer to us?
Yeah, like, if the burden is every queer person needs to act exactly perfect and be in this somehow perfect line of like family friendly, but not so family friendly that they'll call you a groomer, you know, like, and do everything right, and that's the only way that we're gonna have rights. That's impossible, and that's a burden that we can't put on a marginalized group. Like, if you only think that a group can find liberation if everybody in that group is an angel, you don't actually believe in the liberation of that group. People need to have the right, like in disability justice, we talk about the right to make mistakes. Like, if somebody is a human with full legal rights, they're allowed to be stupid and messy and impulsive and make mistakes, and they still have the same rights.
Yeah, and I'm curious what you make. I'm returning to the street because it really did encapsulate so much of the discourse. I'm curious what you make of what he said. In a perfect world, one's actions would only be their own and not reflective of the entire community, but we don't live in a perfect world. How would you push back on this, like, okay, I wish we lived in a world where we could make mistakes, but we don't?
I hate that logic that people often trot out of like, oh sure, you know, I wish the world worked differently, but this is how the world works, and so you need to just, you know, deal with it. Like, my counter to that is always like, what kind of world are we trying to build? Like, if we don't want to be in this world with these sets of rules of respectability politics, we have to be, like, as human beings, the ones to create it. I think if we say, yeah, so this twink had sex in the Senate chambers, and what about it? Like, that is how we help counter a lot of these conservative talking points. If we're not scared of them bringing this stuff up, then it isn't ammunition for them anymore. You know, we have a little bit of that power to say, we're not afraid of this. Our sexuality is beautiful, it's neutral, it's just a human thing that happens sometimes. And that doesn't have any bearing on whether or not we're human beings who deserve equal political representation as anybody else.
Whenever this stuff is happening, I think about the question I always ask myself, right? Is like, okay, if a heterosexual or cisgender person did this, would it reflect badly societally on all heterosexuals or all cisgender people? Like, would they all feel responsible for the greater perception of the community? If the answer is no, then it's no in this case too. And your anger at the Senate twink is misdirected. Like, I believe that. And look, I don't think you necessarily have to get a life-size poster of the Senate twink and put it on your bedroom wall. I'm going to do that because I think this twink is an icon. I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm not saying you have to approve of this person's actions. I'm not saying you have to go have sex in the Senate chamber as a revolutionary act. But you would also be wrong in blaming him for the systemic oppression of queer people. Like, I understand it feels good to, because you're like, well, I would never behave that way, and I would never behave in a way so unbecoming of a sexual minority. But it's literally just incorrect blame. Like, the Senate twink isn't why there is a rampant anti-LGBTQ effort on the right of this country.
It's kind of that just world theory that people sometimes practice of, oh, I would never get assaulted because I don't dress that way. Like, oh, I will never be the victim of homophobia because I'm not being the bad kind of gay. It's like this illusion that we can control whether we're going to get targeted with our choices, because that is like very comforting to think, like, oh, I'm the right kind of gay, I'm not the annoying kind, I'm not the like impropriety, like, you know, behaving kind, I'm gonna be safe. But actually, you're never gonna be safe. Like, they could target you at any time, and so we have to actually stand together against that, because it could happen and come for all of us eventually.
Yeah, wait, can you describe the just world theory? Because I think that applies really well here.
Yeah, so the just world theory in psychology is this idea that people believe that things happen for a good reason, that people deserve what happens to them. The most famous example is like victim blaming sexual assault survivors. So, you know, people who are too promiscuous, therefore who dress in a really slutty way, they're the ones who are more likely to get assaulted, or, you know, people who are irresponsible and walk home alone late at night, those are the people that are victims of crime. People really believe those myths, even though, first of all, they're just like, it's just really a messed up morally belief system, but it's also just statistically not true. Like, things can happen to you no matter where you're sitting and no matter what choice you make. And even though it's comforting to say, I have control over what's going to happen to me, and the world is just and right, I think if you're a marginalized person, you have to realize the world isn't just and right. Like, that's why we're fighting, because it's not.
I was reading back last night and getting ready for this episode some old discourse. I was dusting it off, some old Senate twink discourse, going through the archives, and I found this really great post on Tumblr from Tumblr user Marissa Tomei. Of course, Tumblr user Marissa Tomei has a good take on this. They wrote, there are rapists in the U.S. Supreme Court, and I'm supposed to clutch my pearls over two men having consensual sex in the Senate? Oh, heavens to Betsy. The first time sex acts have been committed in a government building. Are the shades of Congress to be thus polluted? But for the record, no amount of sanitizing your sex life or sanding down of your LGBT edges will make bigots accept you. So don't debase yourself by capitulating an inch to them, especially in ways that throw your fellow community members under the bus. That really resonated with me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. There's nothing sacred about the Senate. You know,
Nothing.
At a time when they're approving bills to just send as many weapons and as much funding to Israel to commit a genocide as possible, I can't speak for the Senate twink. If he was a staffer, that means he's probably like pretty like moderate liberal pilled, just because most people are who are working in the government. But I don't know him. But like, I think we should defile these. You know, it might not have been a political stance on his part, but I think we should defile these institutions because they're violent, they're homophobic, they're transphobic. There's nothing to respect about them. So why are we like trying to make ourselves be respectable inside of them?
Yeah. This video is getting demonetized. All of my videos get demonetized.
I'm sorry.
No. It's my goal. I think something that I do with myself at this point on this podcast is I see how many minutes into the show I can get before absolutely knowing that this video will not be monetized.
Did I need to use like a TikTokism? Like, what's the TikTok word for genocide?
No, what's the we should be having more segs in the Senate hearing room. having more segs in the Senate hearing room where people are unaligned. The last thing I want to say about the Senate twink, and this is kind of unrelated to anything, but I just think it is so camp. He issued an apology via LinkedIn. I think this is from LinkedIn based on the format of the screenshot. But the beginning of the apology reads as such. This has been a difficult time for me as I have been attacked for who I love to pursue a political agenda. While some of my actions in the past have shown poor judgment, I love my job and would never disrespect my workplace. Any attempts to characterize my actions otherwise are fabricated, and I will be exploring what legal options are available to me in these matters. And like, okay, I wish him luck in that legal recourse. I don't know what success he's gonna find, but I love the first sentence, as I have been attacked for who I love.
he really went for the like love is love, like, which is like kind of a respectability politics thing, right? Like it's very funny to take the talking point that like we used to use to like justify gay marriage. Like it's not all a sex thing.
Totally.
It's about love. He's like, this is too also about love.
Like I don't actually think this boy ever meant to be like I don't think this was like a politically revolutionary act for him. Like I think he just thought it was really hot, which I'm sure it was, and I'm happy for him in that. Like I think he was like, I just really want to get fucked in the Senate chamber. And I love
maybe neither of them could host, you know? Maybe neither of them had a place to go. And he was like, I have keys to this office. This is the new answer to can you host is, well, I am an intern.
Senate intern.
At the Senate.
Yeah, I love that so much. I've been attacked for who I love. It's amazing. It's amazing. He walked it back with this like very like Hillary Clinton love is love. So, in staying on theme with like sexual and kink, what some people would like to be outcasts in the community and something that stirs discourse every single year, I want to talk a little bit about the Folsom Street Fair. Devin, what is Folsom?
Folsom is an annual street fair in San Francisco, and it is cordoned off. It's outside, but it's adults only, and videos from it constantly get reproduced with people intentionally excluding the fact that it's adults only and not mentioning that. But it is a big kink event where there are demos and flogging and leather. There are people having sex in the street. There's people in fursuits having sex, wandering around, selling kinky wares. And yeah, it's just a big celebration of queer and kinky sexuality out in the open, but only for adults.
Yes, it's in the open. It's a street fair, but it's in a cordoned off area where there are no children. There are no children. You are ID'd to attend this event. And like you said, every year there is media that circulates the internet from Folsom and goes to places where it was just never intended to go. For example, like last year during Folsom, there were two things that I really remember. One was a guy getting fisted in the street, and then the other was a guy like smeared shit across I think his chest and his back. And what's interesting is I don't even know that was a fetish thing. I actually think it was a political thing because apparently the motivation behind doing that was to make a statement about not wanting to be touched, which I think as a piece of like performance art at a sexual street fair is really interesting. But both of these things went totally nuts on Twitter. There was so much discourse of like, especially from younger queer people, of like, how are we ever gonna stop the discrimination against us if this is how we behave? And then the second you say anything about like, well, this is sex negative, and this is a conservative talking point, there is this very knee-jerk response of like, I'm conservative because I don't want people to smear shit on themselves in the street. And there's this very kind of like heated debate that takes place around how people are supposed to behave and like what constitutes a conservative talking point. I want to appeal to younger queer people here because I came out when I was 15, and I remember for the first at least like 4 years of my being out, I clung pretty tightly to this like, well, I'm not that type of gay sort of thing, which is amazing because now fucking look at me. I lost it somewhere. As it turns out, I am that type of gay. But I spent my whole life feeling like the outcast and feeling like the person who could never fit in and feeling like the faggot. And all I wanted for myself was just to feel like the normal one for once. When I see people react to something like Folsom this way, a part of me identifies with them because I had years where I would have reacted the same way.
First, I think it's great that you bring up like why you had your own reservations about this stuff. I think it is very normal. First of all, because being queer is so shame-ridden in society, and any more deviance on top of that, kinkiness, gender deviance, whatever, it's so shamed. A lot of us feel really ashamed of what might be like lurking under the door, the like trapdoor if we open it up and find out what it is that we're into. It's also true that when you're a young queer kid, you're just coming into your identity and sexuality. And sex can be very scary and can be very dangerous if it can feel that way. And so we often, I think, do have this like self-protective impulse at that age of this is too much for me. I don't want to look at this. I feel uncomfortable. But just because you're not ready for something yet doesn't mean that it shouldn't exist or that it's bad and damaging and all of these things. And we, especially in America, have this big problem of like moral puritanism where if something is disgusting, we assume that it's wrong. So shit on the chest if you're not into shit must be morally wrong. Instead of just being like, oh, that's not for me, yikes, I'm gonna look it up. In the same way that we treat annoyingness as like a sign of immorality or somebody's doing something wrong. And cruising and kinky sexuality, it's always been so integral to gay history and queer liberation. I was reading this amazing book, Cruising, An Intimate History of Erotica Pastime by Alex Espinosa. And he goes into how cruising existed even in ancient Greece, how there was cruising.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. Yeah, they were getting into it. Like, there was graffiti from back then about, like, you know, for, like, cavernous bottom, call this person, you know, go to this house.
Cavernous bottom!
Yeah.
Looking for a cavernous bottom, I'm going to it.
And he talks about how in like aristocratic like France and stuff, like the police were like trying to shut down cruising and like glory holes and, you know, public restrooms where people would have sex in like the 1600s and the 1700s, and how every time the police tried to crack down on it, that just made more people aware that it was a thing. So like when they would pass a law that was like, no having sex in this public restroom in the park, all of the queer people in like France would be like, wait, you mean people have been having sex in this park? I'm gonna go there. Like being repressed and then resisting the laws or resisting the standards of propriety, that's like how we find each other. Like being queer was so unspeakable for the longest time that it was criminalized, it was a mental illness, it was repressed as this evil, disgusting, like threat to public life. And it's when we get demonized in that way and we try to push against it, that's how we even find out who we are. Like being queer is almost definitionally being told that you're wrong and saying, no, I'm gonna choose not to believe that. I've been told all of these things about me right now. And I'm gonna actually I'm gonna own this, I'm gonna own these slurs, I'm gonna own these labels, I'm gonna dress myself in this outfit that might scare some people, and might be really transgressive and sexual. And that's how I'm gonna find the other people like me.
And look, we're not saying that if you see a video of someone getting fisted in the street and are repulsed by it, I'm not saying that that's your first step into your journey that ends with you getting fisted in the street. I'm very well aware not everyone wants to get fisted in the street, not everyone wants to have shit smeared on them, and that is perfectly fine.
I know some who do.
Let's keep me out of this. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Devin, but I think what we're getting at is like, your being uncomfortable with something does not make it morally wrong, and does not mean that it is harm.
And it doesn't mean that it's being forced on you. It goes back to Ariel Scarcella. Like, her first, like, transphobic videos were saying, people are trying to force me as a lesbian to have sex with people with a penis. It's that don't shove it in my face thing all over again. And somebody just being, in that case, a trans lesbian, doesn't mean you're being forced to have sex with anybody. And consenting adults fisting each other or wearing a fursuit and having sex at an 18-plus event, again, isn't anybody forcing you to do anything you don't want to do. Like, you might feel scandalized, you might feel uncomfortable, you might want to look away and not be there. that's fine. It's okay to be a gay normie or whatever. It's okay to be vanilla.
You can be Pete Buttigieg.
Yes, you can. You can be the most boring dude in the world, and that's fine. You're still part of us. And like, I don't understand why that nuance is so hard for people. I feel like a lot of people just need to like take 5 deep breaths and say, okay, I'm not under attack right now, just because I'm uncomfortable. And yeah, again, even if you're never going to be the person who wants to get fisted or like, you know, do suspension play or whatever, just ask yourself, what about myself am I ashamed of? What about me? What hidden things behind the trapdoors would other people look at me that way? Or I'm worried about people seeing me that way. And like, how can you give yourself some of that self-compassion and get over that a little bit? And then maybe you won't feel so threatened by other people being freaks and perverts and bad and annoying or whatever else it is.
Yeah, and I mean, with this whole thing of like, oh, well, look at these videos of someone getting fisted in the street, like, they're gonna take our rights away because of this. Honey, they are taking our rights away. They're taking our rights away whether you give them a video of someone getting fisted in the street or not. Because you know what? If they don't have a video of someone getting fisted in the street, they just make shit up anyway. Like, the biggest things that right-wing media as a whole latched onto over the last couple of years aren't fulsome. They're not even the Senate trained. They're like made-up shit that Libs of TikTok puts out about like random queer people just like existing in public teaching positions or whatever. They will find whatever they want to find in order to discriminate against us. It's not this just world theory.
People who say this stuff, I wonder what they even want. Like, if Folsom, if an 18+ cordoned off event is unacceptable, and is like a private dungeon in somebody's house unacceptable, like, is, again, I just remember like the early 2000s and just how overtly homophobic that era was as a queer teen at that time. And we're back there again, where like the people protesting at the Pride parades back then, and I'm sure many places still are, they would have signs that would say things like, this is like one that I actually saw back in the day, eating shit is not a human right. They were treating gay men having sex as if it was the most vile, fetishistic in their mind, right? Like, those things are linked. Like, that it was the same thing as the guy with the shit on his chest. So if they already see that way, we have to stand with the dude with the shit on his chest, you know? Like, maybe we're going to keep our distance scent-wise, but like, he's one of us. He's our dude. Like, if he's not free, we're not free.
I want to give baby gays, as I've attempted to do throughout, this conversation, just as much grace as possible, because I really understand why respectability politics, I understand why that's an attractive mindset, especially, if you've lived your whole life in fear. And so I was like perusing Reddit, and I found this person, Reddit user Lauren M., who wrote something that I thought really gave grace to this idea in a beautiful way. They wrote, making yourself smaller is a dysfunctional fear response that people cling to as a result of abuse, in an effort to make the abuse stop. It doesn't work. It never has, and it never will. It is, in fact, just the victim perpetuating the abuse on themselves. All we have is each other. Don't let them use divide and conquer while dangling a reward you'll never get. I think that was really beautiful.
That is beautiful. I love the last line. Like, the reward of cishet approval, it is not worth it. That's the kind of stuff that keeps us in the closet. We have to dream past that.
I want to wrap up today's episode by reading a portion of an essay that I put together from Tumblr. It's by a Tumblr user called VA Spider. And this essay went viral some time ago when it was published. It's called Pete Buttigieg is Just a Faggot. So here it is. Pete Buttigieg is just a faggot. It's very important to me that younger queers understand this. To the people who you're trying to be more respectable for when you say things like neopronouns set the trans movement back, or you're why the cishets don't accept us, or including asexuals or bi people with the wrong kinds of partners, or non-binary people, or kinksters, or non-passing trans people, or furries, or polyamorous people just hurts us. Can't you wait until we get all of our rights before we talk about some of yours? To those people, Pete Buttigieg is just a fag. On Sunday night at Pride Northwest, some kids, late teens, early 20s, asked us what our I survived waiting for this button meant. All of the queer adults at the tables making up our ad hoc counter looked at each other and sighed a little. Emmett and another adult started to explain the way the Reagan administration handled, or didn't handle, the beginning of the AIDS crisis. How many people died, how much we were ignored, the Ashes action. the Time magazine article, which explicitly blamed bisexual men for passing the pandemic to the cishet community, playing on all the worst stereotypical bullshit. The way that even when the CDC started paying attention, they were so focused on gay men that they ignored AIDS in the lesbian community, leading to the, quote, women don't get AIDS, they just die from it poster, and so on. That's what I need you to understand. The people from whom you are folding yourself into smaller and smaller boxes will never see you as anything but a freak, a queer, a fag. Never. These are the people who will stand by and let you wither away and die alone, gasping for breath in a cinder-block room, and not even claim your ashes, and they will say you deserve it because of your lifestyle. If they speak of you at all, it will be by the wrong name, with the pictures you hate the most. They will curse at your lover, throw him out of the home you shared, and steal the gift you gave last Christmas to throw it in the trash just so he can't have it. And they'll say Jesus loves you while you do it. They'll feel good and righteous and blessed and holy and pure for doing it. And for them, you spit in the eye of your sister. For them, you disavow your sibling. For their sake, you trim away bits of your heart and lace yourself up tight. Never too loud, never too queer, never inconvenient or embarrassing, never asking for too much. Pete Buttigieg is what happens when your boomer dad turns out gay. Middle America. Parents still married. Suburban sprouted. Valedictorian. Harvard educated. Rhodes Scholarship. Military service. More power to him. I hope he and Chasten are very happy together. Genuinely, I do. You couldn't create a more respectable gay if you threw one in a lab run by concerned voter focus groups. But Pete Buttigieg is just a fag. That's the part you don't seem to get. When they abandoned us, they abandoned all of us. Rock Hudson was a beloved movie star and even personally friendly with that horrid pair of ambitious jackals, referring to the Reagans. Nancy Reagan refused to help him get into the only place in the world that could treat him at the time, and he died. It was 1985, 4 years after the CDC first released papers on what would eventually become known as HIV/AIDS, and 7 years after the first known death from an infection from HIV-2. Reagan hadn't even said the word AIDS by the time Hudson died. I need you to understand that if Pete Buttigieg is just a fag, if that human embodiment of a Wonder Bread, mayo, and Oscar Mayer bologna sandwich is not respectable enough for them, and he's not, then the rest of us have absolutely no hope of measuring it. Not even if we trim away every colorful, beautiful piece of our community. Not even if the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence vanish into the ether. Not even if we sacrifice the 5 elements of Vogue on the altar of white supremacist, cis-het, middle-class conformity. We can't trim ourselves down to something we'll accept. The only other option is radical acceptance of our queer selves. The only other option is solidarity. The only other option is for fats and femme queens and drags and kinksters and queers and zine writers and sex workers and furries and addicts and kids and the ones who can look us in the eye and see all of us to say we're here, we're queer, get used to it, just the way we did 30 years ago. It's revolutionary, complete, and total acceptance of our entire community, not just the ones the cis-hets can pretend to be comfortable with as long as we don't challenge them too much. Or it's conceding the shoreline inch by inch to the rising waters of fascism until we've got nowhere left to stand and some of us start drowning. That's it. Either it's all of us or it's none of us. Because if we leave the answer up to the Reagans of the world and all the people who enabled him in the name of lower taxes and Democrats who wring their hands, weeping, oh, I don't agree with it, but we'll lose the election if we fight it right now. The answer is none of us. The brunch gays can come too, I guess. I thought that was fantastic.
It's beautiful. It nails it. Fighting for acceptance in a unacceptable system isn't going to get us free.
Devin, thank you so much for being here today and for shedding your light on this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Matt. It's so nice to just be able to talk about this stuff. Yeah, this discourse about who's the acceptable target and who's the problem within our own community, it saps so much of our energy that we could expend on fighting our common actual enemy. And so I think it's really important to talk about.
Where can people find you? Where can people support your work?
Yeah, probably the best place is my Substack. So drdevinprice.substack.com. That's where you'll find the piece on annoying queers that we've been talking about. And that's everything on there is totally free. So lots of queer culture, you know what I mean? as well as some university stuff.
And if you want to support him monetarily, he has books.
Yes.
Buy those
Yes, like books about autism, books about shame,
Buy those books.
books about laziness. Yeah, all the unrespectable things.
You gotta promote your books. Do what your publicist is telling you to do.
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you. Yes. Those are awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked the episode, if you took something from it, if you found it maybe challenging to your psyche, then I'm glad. And maybe feel free to share it with someone who might take something from it too. Until next time, I love you so much and stay creepy.
We did it.
We did it. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.
Of a man, rather than the idealized version. In many ways, this portrait presents us with a reflection of a nation in flux as well. Like scat players, this was created during the interwar period of Germany, a period of healing wounds and looming threats in the horizon. While Dr. Glazer appears successful from his elegant and smart attire, there's a clear hint of unease in this work. Perhaps a slight amusement on his face is tinged with cynicism, a reflection of a world turned upside down. The background, depicting a snow-covered Dresden building with a seemingly shattered facade, could be interpreted as a metaphor for the fractured state of German society at the time. To me, this portrait is a masterclass in the new objectivity's sharp observation of psychological depth. Dr. Glazer's complex expression, with the painting's subtle symbolism, offers a unique window into the life of a prominent German figure and the anxieties of a nation struggling to rebuild itself. Otto Dix's Mother of Child, painted in 1921, goes beyond a mere depiction of motherhood. It's a cold representation of the social and personal costs of World War I, delivered through brutal yet hauntingly beautiful portrayal. The title, Mother of Child, evokes a tradition in general, one typically brimming with tenderness and sentimentality. Here, however, Otto Dix subverts this expectation entirely. The woman's gaunt appearance and pale complexion is a strong departure from the idealized presentation of motherhood. The scenes she and her child are victims of poverty and famine, perhaps even reduced to wandering the streets in search of money, food, and shelter. Her vacant, sunken eyes speak of a profound loss, a hollowness that mirrors the emptiness left by the war. It would surprise me if she was once the wife of a soldier who has since fallen in battle, leaving her and the child alone. As for the child itself, with its abnormal shaped head and pallid expression, to me upon first glance, it becomes a sort of symbol of the future, burdened by the previous generation's trauma, innocence, and completely at the mercy of the tattered world they've now been raised in. The muted colour palette, devoid of warmth and vibrancy, reflects the environment, both physical and emotional, left by the war. The bleak walls of the buildings and absence of familiar comforts in the background create a sense of hollowness, reflecting the emptiness in the mother's eyes. This environment truly underscores the struggle for survival, a stark contrast to the idealized versions of nurturing homes traditionally associated with paintings of motherhood. Mother with Child could also be interpreted as a commentary on the breakdown of societal structures in the wake of the war. The woman, traditionally seen as a caregiver and nurturer, is herself depleted and unable to efficiently provide for her offspring. This could well have been a common sight for the artist during the interwar years, the traditional pillars of the family and community, essential for a nurturing environment, and now fractured, leaving individuals like this mother and child adrift in a harsh and unforgiving world. As I said, this painting is not just a depiction of a single mother and child, it's a portrayal of a generation grappling with physical and emotional scars, a society of people struggling to rebuild from the ashes. The painting's emotional weight lies in its subversion of the traditional theme, using the familiar image of motherhood to deliver a harsh, yet unforgettable message about the true cost of war. Painted in 1923, Prostitutes presents us with yet another pretty unflattering portrayal of the post-war characters who will come across in his recovering country. Similar to his Ellis painting, the faces of these women are repulsive, exaggerated, with the one closest to us painted with a deceptive grin and a shade of dark crimson red on her face. The one behind looks off to the distance dismissively and vacantly. It's almost as if Otto Dix is portraying her as abnormally dull-witted and stupid. Despite their efforts to be alluring to their clients, the artist here, in keeping to his distinctive technique, depicts them as quite the opposite. This would not be the only time he would engage with this theme in his art either. His painting, completed 2 years later, for example, titled Three Prostitutes in the Streets, depicts two ladies of the evening in search of customers. A third walks by with her hands in the air, giving off the impression that she is married into money and enjoys the trappings of life. She also carries a dog, a toy dog. It is a prop that points to her as a cat woman, or if you will, a plaything. These sex workers are depicted with a high level of self-confidence. It seems they are forthright with regard to their profession, while the woman with her nose aloft seems to be less honest about hers. Although in his 1923 painting, the symbolism is a little more ambiguous and mysterious, the general impression that Otto Dix felt towards prostitutes in his country at the time is very obvious. Unapologetically, he points out the irony and shows the exchange for what it is, the promise of affection for desperate men, being completely dishonest with many ulterior motives behind it. It is less clear as to whether or not this was in direct relation to the post-war environment of his time, but again it wouldn't surprise me if prostitution in Weimar Germany was becoming more common as job opportunities, especially for widows of fallen soldiers, were by then very few and far between for the middle to working class. By 1924, Otto Dix would return to his first-hand experiences as a machine gunner in the Western Front within his art, with a series of around 50 etchings titled Der Krieg, meaning the war in English. These many etchings stand as a harrowing indictment of war's brutality. In this series, which was published in Berlin and was inspired by Dix's experience viewing Francisco Goya's Disasters of War engravings in Basel, he frequently used the ravaged landscape itself as a metaphor for the shattered worldview of the war generation. Barren battlefields, skeletal trees, cadaverous bodies, and twisted metal becoming recurring motifs. The shattered environment reflects psychological devastation wrought by the war, leaving viewers with a sense of profound alienation. While Otto's etchings are undeniably rooted in realism, they also incorporate elements of the grotesque and satirical. This can be seen in images of soldiers with bizarre features, nightmarish visions, and scenes of civilian indulgence set against the backdrop of the battlefield carnage. This use of grotesque serves to further emphasize the absurdity and inhumanity of war. There are so many gut-wrenching examples to choose from that they almost deserve their own video, with some etchings presenting a scene so blunt and harrowing that it needs no explanation as to what it entails, and others left more ambiguous and ominous that require the viewer's own investigation. Undoubtedly, though, the one etching in this collection that sticks out the most and captures the most intrigue is the one titled Stormtroopers at Night Under a Gas Attack. Dix's use of distorted figures, particularly the ghoulish gas masks, is central to the artwork's message. The masks rob the soldiers of their individuality, transforming them into faceless entities, made to look almost like ghosts or demons with the disturbing and alien appearance of the masks. This highlights the dehumanizing effects of war, where soldiers become mere instruments or machines of violence, their humanity sacrificed for the sake of conflict. Even the shell tree on the right looks just as menacing as any of the modern weapons used in combat, due to its pointed limbs representing a demonic pitchfork. Some of these soldiers look like they've been snagged on a line of barbed wire, representing the many ways in which a soldier's body came under attack. The artist again doesn't shy away from the human cost of war. While no dead bodies are explicitly shown, the implication is clear. Before moving on to the next analysis, I think it's worth taking a brief silent moment of just observing and contemplating on these war etchings. We always hear tangible tales of what happened during this awful time in human history, but very rarely do we get to see it in the way that Otto Dix did. Here, he offers us the chance to see through his own eyes what kind of horrors took place, and why we should never forget how senseless and wasteful war truly is. So while looking through these, think to yourself, could you really endure what he endured? Does it make you think you might take your precious life and freedoms for granted? Just what would your role be within the midst of such unthinkable terror?
Doubt you'll have heard of all of them. But I will assert that these games, despite their engaging mechanics and memorable worlds, haven't been able to culturally reach beyond their own shadow. They've been released, appreciated by a few, and then disappeared back into the darkness of so many passed-over titles. And that's a shame. But it's also fitting. All of these games aren't just culturally overshadowed, but thematically fascinated by what happens when you're swallowed by the dark. That doesn't mean they have to be self-serious, though. Greener Grass Awaits joins a grand indie tradition of combining genres in ways never thought possible. Musical dungeon crawler, mayonnaise-based clickers, deck-building first-person speedrunners. Compared to these, golf horror might not sound too radical, but Greener Grass Awaits, released last year by developer Yakko and Pop, still got me totally unprepared with how brilliantly it combines those two disparate genres. The golf part might be easier to explain first. Greener Grass Awaits begins with your arrival to the Green Canyon Golf Club, a setting that, with help from a gentle lo-fi filter, looks pulled from the posts of 1,000 liminal space Twitter accounts. The sun is setting and the door is locked, but you want to golf, and so you find somewhere to jump the fence and start whacking. Is that what golf players say when they play golf? I'm just going to assume it is. The golf gameplay itself is clumsily, charmingly physical here. Whereas other games basically have you control the club itself, Greener Grass Awaits takes pains to never lose the sense of your own body. What do I mean by this? Well, before you can hit the ball, you have to press a button to set your bag down on the grass and another button to select which club you want. Then, when you're ready to line up your shot, the game doesn't give the traditional third-person omniscient view of the scene. The perspective stays resolutely first person. You often can't look at the ball and the green at the same time, leading to an awkwardly realistic little shuffle as you look at the hole, look at your feet, shuffle a little bit, look at the hole again, readjust one more time, and finally swing the mouse to take your shot. The game rarely makes you feel good at golf, or is drawn into a spat of fear that's cutting back and forth more than once. But there's nothing to unlock, and as far as I can tell, no reward for good performance. Like real golf, your score matters exactly as much as you care about it. Also, like real golf, nothing magically teleports to keep up with you. After you take your shot, you've got to pick up your bag and haul it with you if you want access to your other clubs. After you sink a putt, you've got to go and retrieve your ball. Although the shape of the holes aren't anything to write home about, the vibes of the course more than make up for it. The nostalgic twilight which greets you fades in real time as you walk along the second fairway. Accompanied by a moody synth, the shadows lengthen and warmth disappears from the scene. A few more holes in, you'll be playing in the dark. But not before you have a very strange conversation with a very normal man.
Hey, the course is closed. Well, it is, so you should get going. Hurry. I'm getting out of here. Don't break anything.
the most engaging things about playing Greener Grass Awaits is the knowledge that this is somehow a golf horror game. But you don't quite know when that second part is going to kick in. There is certainly ominous foreshadowing, the freeze frame over dialogue choices, or the out-of-bounds invisible wall that tells you, I need to golf, I love to golf, I golf in my dreams, I love the golf ball. But in these opening levels, I also wondered how the hell this could segue into full-blown horror. Not knowing exactly what a game is capable of means it's able to consistently surprise you. Eventually with scares, but first, as it turned out, with comedy. On the fifth hole, basically in the middle of the night, a warning requests that even though this hole is horseshoe-shaped, please don't cut corners by hitting your ball over the cliff wall. For safety reasons. After completely ignoring that sign, I rounded the corner and froze. Oh my god, is that a body right next to the hole? Who did this? What monster could have... Oh, or maybe this is why they said not to hit the ball over the cliff. Oops. 2 holes later, the horror kicks in. There is nothing too cerebral going on in Greener Grass Awaits. It is fundamentally a silly game about playing a scary round of golf. But that doesn't mean its horror design isn't kind of genius. You tee up on the 8th hole, back away, and then immediately after your initial drive, a rustle in the grass and a big musical sting alerts you to the fact that, hey, there's a guy standing behind you. The guy, you'll soon find out, operates on fairly simple, scary guy rules. When you're not looking at him, he'll run towards you. But look at him too long, and he'll also start running towards you. You really don't want him to reach you. So, to progress, you just need to run away, frequently checking back over your shoulder to make sure he can't creep too close. Except, this is still a game where you have to play golf, too. And suddenly, all the clunky design decisions, the physical bag you have to set down and pick up, the rigidly first-person perspective while lining up your shot, they all make sense because all of those things are interfering with the one thing you really need to keep an eye on. I've rarely experienced the entire mechanical energy of a game shift so much with a single addition. Par, the previous motivation, is completely out the window. Whereas before, I spent ages adjusting my feet and luxuriously feeling out the angle of each hit, every new interaction with the ball became a frenzied, seconds-long attempt to simply stay ahead of the ever-approaching zombie dudes. It even introduced new strategies to golf itself. I actively tried to overshoot the hole because looking back at the course meant I could more easily keep an eye on my pursuers. It turns out that golf lends itself perfectly to horror, a meaningless yet detail-oriented task that you will inevitably screw up through stress. And then halfway through the game, the mechanics of golf shift yet again. The moonlit night sinks into a near total blackness, a dark that will literally devour you if you stand in it too long. Your only source of light, the golf ball itself. How fortunate. Except, naturally, you still have to play golf, which means that you have to repeatedly whack your only light source far away from you and then chase after it, sprinting away from the dark. And don't forget to be back. There are some kinds of horror that reside in the dim corners of your mind and rear their head as you're lying in bed or walking down a dark street. And then there's horror as almost a sport, where a coach adjusts unseen variables to create the perfect combination of factors for fear. Greener Grass Awaits is the latter. Nothing posed in the game is too existentially terrifying. None of the imagery has kept me up at night. But there are so many little ideas in the game that are almost infuriatingly clever. I found myself shouting, "Oh, you!" on my screen multiple times, involuntary outbursts built through a mix of stress, amusement, and respect. It's an hour-ish long, thoroughly entertaining, and dark in a wonderfully silly way. I would love to see more developers smash light horror into other unsuspecting genres, using its inherent tension to accentuate previously existing gameplay ideas. More games could be pulled just a little into the dark. But of course, there is that other kind of horror. In 2018, I played a short title by developer Atherica Games called Bonbon. In the time since, I haven't been able to get it out of my head. Bonbon is a game about a very small child and a very large rat. It has virtually none of the gameplay complexity of Green Grass Awaits, and replaces the novelty of a golf course with the familiarity of a suburban home. Your gameplay directives in order are clean up the yard, clean up your room, share your birthday cake, escape, hide. All of them are, in one way or another, about the giant rat. Bonbon, the rat, isn't immediately a malevolent Game Boy presence. He actually helps in the first couple scenarios, albeit in a slightly unnerving way. As you toddle around the yard, picking up your toys and saying hello to them in his own vibrant voice, Bonbon smashes through the fence. But not to worry, he's just holding Mr. Orange, a ball that he then drops on the grass for you to collect. Inside, it's the same story. You've got to find 4 tiny people to put back in your toy box, and what luck, Bonbon has one of them. Does he hand it to you? Not really. He kind of drops it and it bounces, so you have to reach uncomfortably close to his massive feet and furry stomach. But I mean, nothing bad has happened with the rat yet. Then Bonbon is at the table with your birthday cake, and oh, he wants a slice? Well, he's a big rat, that's only fair. Though the way he throws his hand out so demandingly is a little frightening, and his squeaks just get louder and louder, and when you say no, Bonbon, he smashes the table so hard with his fist that all the plates jump in the air, and before you know it, half the cake is gone. The rat still isn't happy, and he punches the table over and over, drool dripping from his twitching mouth, and then he decides he doesn't need you to feed him the cake at all. The question with Bonbon, at least from an analytical perspective, is going to be about what the big rat represents. Because it always means something in horror: latent trauma, repressed guilt, societal anxieties. And if you want to go down that road, I think it's pretty obvious. Bonbon is the father. All your nice in-person interactions in the game are with Mom. Dad is confined to voices yelling, family strife behind closed doors, and notably, a tape player recording where he reads a fairy tale about a wretched, scheming rat. Bonbon is literally a rat, too. You can find a newspaper clipping advertising a fancy rat up for adoption. The bouncy end credits play over a little rat in a cage. It's not hard to follow the child logic of our protagonist, combining a scary fairy tale, a new pet, and a family dynamic they're not equipped to deal with into one massive, terrifying rodent. But this subtext isn't what's made Bonbon stick with me. Instead, it's one incredibly specific way the game leverages its setting and horror. Forgive me for the short digression, but when I was a kid, I had this recurring fear while laying in bed. I would wake up in the middle of the night and suddenly become aware that while I was looking at one half of my bedroom, the other half could contain anything at all. Any brand of evil, any array of monsters. But moreover, I would feel that whatever evil the other half of the room contained, it would only be realized when I perceived it. That it was waiting until I rolled over to strike. I would lay there, petrified, unwilling to move, for fear of somehow unlocking the thing I was most afraid of. Bonbon contains exactly this scene. You nod off, listening to the dark fairy tale, have a brief, ominous dream, and wake up facing the door, the outlines from your nightlight circling the room. There's the sound of your parents yelling outside, and the scene will stay exactly like that, locked in a nervous stasis until you roll over. And of course, on the other side, there's Bonbon, as angry and terrifying as he's ever been. It's a viciously mean jump scare. And also, maybe, the most effective one I've ever experienced. When I'm reading a short story, I don't expect the same things as a novel. I don't need complex character arcs or comprehensive world building. I basically want it to set up a funny or scary or emotional punchline, deliver that punchline as memorably as possible, then conclude while I'm still stewing over the ramifications. Bonbon is all set up. This moment is the punchline. The dark containing exactly the thing you most hope it doesn't, exactly when you don't want to see it. Even though I know it's coming, I It still gets me every time. Bonbon isn't the only game centered around reckless child endangerment, though. How's that for a segue? In fact, the whole conceit of many cinematic platformers seems like it could be described as, bet you didn't expect that child death, huh? From early titles like Heart of Darkness to titans like Limbo and Inside, the formula of the young child plus dark, dangerous world has become a micro-genre of its own. And this niche is where the exceptionally bleak Bramble the Mountain King makes its home. It doesn't start with child death, though. Part of what's fun about the game, released in 2023 by Dim Frost Studio, is how variable its tone is. Based very specifically on Scandinavian folklore, Bramble almost certainly contains the lightest moments of any game in this video. Herding the berry-headed Rumpelstiltskin, playing hide-and-seek with gnomes, riding a hedgehog across a pond. I could edit together footage of this game to convince you that Bramble the Mountain King is nothing more than Ollie's silly countryside romp, a delightful little exploration of the friendliest parts of a mythic countryside. Oh, and what's that over there? What's he doing? That's really small for a horse. Oh, God. Bramble doesn't just have the lightest moments of any game in this video. It also has, by far, the darkest. I'm not kidding when I say that the piece of media I most frequently thought of while playing Bramble was Come and See, the 1985 Soviet anti-war film widely considered to contain some of the most harrowing images ever put on screen. Bramble parallels specific scenes from Come and See. The awful trek through a bog, the empty village is haunted by the dead, a young blonde boy's face contorted by fear and trauma. But just as effectively, the game parallels the surreal nightmare tone of the film. Short glimpses of happiness and whimsy are snatched away by unpredictable horror. Scenes flow together without clear connecting points. The world itself bends and breaks instead of allowing us a consistent perspective. I don't mean to imply that Bramble holds the same gravity as Come and See, nor tackle subjects nearly as important. But in a game this dreamlike, home is the thing I cling to. And tonally, little Ollie's encounters with the monsters of Scandinavian myth feel like his own personal world. There's too much in Bramble to go through beat by beat, and the story isn't literal enough for me to sum up quickly, so instead, I just want to talk through some of my favorite little pieces of the game. For instance, the ever-changing sense of scale. We start in a normally sized child's bedroom and climb down into a familiarly imposing forest. But somewhere along the way, the woods scale up, or we scale down. Individual stones become shoulder high, trickles of water morph into dangerous rapids. Ollie walks between the shadows of individual clover. And then, he somehow claws his way back, re-emerging into realistically modest huts and houses, except in his absence, the structures have each lost their sense of home, far less welcoming than when he first left them. Bramble, like the Little Nightmares games that came before it, is perfectly willing to cast scenes into complete blackness and give its protagonist a single handheld light. Bramble, like Limbo, has bear traps that will separate head from body. But Bramble also has a specificity to its imagery that separates it from its inspirations. One of the most memorable chapters has a run-in with not a zombie or a giant, but a midwife, and a woman determined to relinquish her infant in the swamp. There's a great breakdown by the channel Swedish Ghost Lovers of folklore touch points in the game, but there's only one I absolutely needed to know about. That Bramble would be bold enough to not only include the spirit of a sacrificed child, but literally have you try and fail to stop the ritual sacrifice is something I won't soon forget. That it follows this up with a boss fight culminating in a God of War 3 style infinitely bloody cliffhanger effect, I will be thinking about this game for a long time. Where Bramble, the Mountain King, summons its most nightmarish idea isn't from any single event, though. Instead, it's the building feeling that not only are things not okay, things will never be okay again. Ollie has so thoroughly passed through the looking glass that it's hard to imagine a path through which he could return to everyday life. Even the hedgehog, the gnomes, the magic of only a few hours ago seem impossibly far away. Towards the end, an eclipse literally blacks out the sun. All light, all hope is snuffed out. Taking a step back, what's always striking to me about this cinematic platformer genre is that it needs to be throwing new stuff at you all the time. The mechanics are rarely interesting enough to support the game on their own. Plodding characters, sluggish jumps, simple puzzles. Moreover, the protagonists of these games almost never even speak. The style demands that the environment, the context of the characters remain so enthralling throughout, we never have to rely on the limited fun provided by its other elements. Bramble the Mountain King does this quite well. The last game I want to talk about attempts the same feat, and somehow pulls it off even more spectacularly while pointed in a completely different direction. If you wanted to summarize White Shadows, released in 2021 by developer Monocle, as the sum of its influences, it would end up sounding supremely derivative. Another cinematic platformer, completely in grayscale a la Limbo, starts with you tumbling out of a pipe, just like Inside, even has puzzles solved by luring a bunch of chicks into a big machine like Inside, pulls language directly from Animal Farm. Subtle with its inspirations, it is not. And yet, White Shadows has creative energy exploding out of it. There is nothing low effort in the decisions made here, and although it's not my favorite game I've talked about today, White Shadows maybe makes me the saddest I've never really seen it referenced anywhere, because man, is this game trying to do something, and it succeeds in far more interesting ways than it fails. The world of White Shadows is a sort of massive subterranean industrial dystopia where enormous floodlights replace natural sunlight and every catwalk dangles above a 1,000-foot drop. It's not just an expanse of black and white, but of light and shadow, where everything not explicitly illuminated falls into the dark. This is, in fact, a central driver of the plot. In-universe advertisements extol the virtues of artificial light baths. The ads say that the population of pigs should take light baths every day to avoid the darkness. That darkness is represented by birds. It is, at times, extremely on the nose.
Just a metaphor for racism.
But what the game lacks in nuance, it makes up for in the literal imagery of its world design, and I almost feel like I've been burying the lead here, because look at this, y'all. Look at how far back the camera pulls. Look at how far the background extends into the distance. Despite being a 3-hour game made by like 8 people, White Shadows somehow communicates the same feelings as Rapture or the city in Mirror's Edge, that I'm just a speck being swallowed by the enormity of my surroundings. The game's standout set pieces further de-emphasize the already diminutive flavor. You're running along when suddenly Flight of the Bumblebees or the Blue Danube kicks up, and the focus of the camera becomes the great machines of the city, squares of simultaneously running trains, fields of egg-collecting robots all moving in perfect harmony. The game traps you between the gears, makes you feel that you're the problem in the system otherwise perfectly optimized.